Before I hand over to our moderator, a few lines about our speakers. Dilip D'Souza was educated in Pilani, Providence, Delhi, Rishi Valley, Bombay, Cambridge, Austin, and elsewhere. Once a computer scientist, he now writes about political and social issues, travel, sports, and mathematics. His writing awards include the Outlook Picador Nonfiction Prize and the Newsweek Daily Beast South Asia Commentary Prize. He has written 9 books. Dilip lives in Bombay with his wife Vibha, children Sahir and Surabhi, and cat Aziz. He misses his Rhodesian Ridgeback Shaka. Mmhonlumo Kikon, a poet and author, was born in Kohima and studied literature at the University of Delhi. He has published 3 poetry collections, the Penme poems, The Village Empire, and Sling Stones. He is also the author of His Majesty's Headhunters, The Siege of Kohima That Shaped World History. Kikon served as a legislator representing the Bhandari Assembly constituency of Nagaland from 2013 to 2023. Rita Chowdhury is an award-winning Assamese poet and writer, currently working as the editor of Goryoshi, a literary magazine published in Assam by the Assam Tribune Group. A former associate professor of political science at Cotton University, Guwahati, and former director of the National Book Trust, Rita is an important voice in contemporary Assamese literature. She has authored 17 novels, 4 collections of poems, and 1 memoir, delving into diverse themes such as historical events, cultural identity, and the complexities of human relationships. Her works include The Neverland and 0 Hour, a novel on the historic Bangladesh Liberation War. Among her most celebrated works is the critically acclaimed Maqam, published in English as Chinatown Days. Her novel Deo Langkhui, or The Divine Sword, won the Sahitya Academy Award in 2008. Rita is also the recipient of the Assam Valley Literary Award, among many other honors. Last but not least, Sumantra Bose is a comparative political scientist whose work focuses on the intersections of nationalisms, democracy, and conflict in South Asia, the Balkans, and the Middle East. Born and raised in Calcutta, he graduated from Amherst College, Massachusetts in 1992 and received his PhD from Columbia University in 1998. From January 2025, he is Professor of International and Comparative Politics at Kriya University. Prior to that, he held a chair at the London School of Economics and Political Science for nearly 2 decades. Sumantra Bose is the director of the Netaji Research Bureau at the Netaji Bhavan, Kolkata. With that, may I now hand over to Karma Paljor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introductions. I'd like to thank the organizers, grateful for being here. I think I'm coming here, after a long, long time. I used to cover the book fair as a rookie journalist way back, and it's quite overwhelming with the crowds and the people, and to do a session. And a session which is not an easy one, it's a difficult one. I have a friend in Assam, and we drive to Arunachal Pradesh sometimes. So every time we cross a place called Gopur, and he literally translates Assamese to Hindi. That's the way he speaks. And he used to say, Karma, ye kanak lata hai. And every time we pass Gopur, he would say, Kanak lata hai. And I couldn't understand what he was trying to tell me. Later, I came to know about Kanak Lata Barwa's contribution to the Indian freedom struggle, and what a story, of a teenager. That's how even we, being from the Northeast, do not know about the history, about the contributions of our people, as far as the so-called mainstream is concerned. Now, what do most of us here, when you do a search on this particular topic, you'll get terms like colonial bias. There was colonial bias. That's why the Northeast was left out of the mainstream historical narrative. Post-colonial era, what happened again? Again, we were ignored because of so many facts, because the focus was so much on the mainstream, the mainland areas, that we just became footnotes of history, despite having a very rich, history. The Ahom kingdom, for instance, 600 years, the Mughals could never set foot in the northeast because of them. The Battle of Saraighat. So very few people know about these historical events and the people who played a critical role in these events. I think my panel here, distinguished panel here, will be able to unravel those complicated layers and bring to the fore and make it a kind of an educational journey. Mr. Mmhonlumo Kikon, my friend here, who straddles being an author, a poet, and a politician, he messaged me a little while earlier saying, Karma, don't introduce me as, the politician bit. I think, but that's a part of, what he is. So my first question, as all of you begin your opening remarks, is, as a leader of the Northeast and having been a spokesperson for a major political party, how do you contribute to the history of the Northeast slowly being introduced in history books? How do we fight that?
Thank you, Kama, for acknowledging that there's not enough written about the Northeast and the history of Northeast. And like he rightly mentioned, the only or the most popular, historical story of the Northeast is the Battle of Saraighat. And I think there's more to Northeast than that. I would just look at three, aspects of history writing in Northeast, and also how where it is placed in the entire Indian, historiography, and where we can contribute as writers of history. One, there's a genuine attempt today of deconstructing the way that historians look at the region, especially in terms of the colonial narrative of binaries, where every aspect of our history, especially because there's a huge population in Northeast which relies on oral tradition and oral history. And it's a very complicated, source. And because in the world of academia, evidence is a very important aspect of writing history. So that's one challenge we had, and we continue to have. The other one is in terms of the entire history, especially the colonial history of that region called Northeast today. People assume, and we still continue to assume, that it was just one homogeneous region which was treated as one. Although when the British came, after especially in 1826, when the Treaty of Yandabu was signed between the British and the Burmese, and when the British finally took over, the entire narrative changed of, especially the history of Northeast. So the decolonization aspect, and also the attempts by many scholars to, one, look at the, various colonial method of looking at the region, because in every literature available, especially if you go to the archives, you will find everything being defined by the official speak of the British colonizers, and today we grapple with that. The third point I would like to mention is that today there's a mushrooming of a lot of writers from the region itself, where the indigenous scholar is writing about their own history. And there's an intensive attempt to really look at whether, for instance, just give one example, whether the violence of naming, for instance, when the colonial administration named several places as per their convenience, one, because of course they were not able to pronounce our names properly, but again, it's part of cultural hegemony. So, decluttering all that is one real challenge that we as writers from the Northeast face, and in the course of our discussion, I'll bring more of that into the light, but for now I'll conclude with this.
So a quick follow-up on your book, His Majesty's Headhunters. And there's so much of interest in the Battle of Kohima or the Siege of Kohima. How difficult was it for you to research and bring out that book?
As I've already mentioned, one of the challenges was deconstructing the entire narrative that exists and looking at a story as the Battle of Kohima. The significance of that battle is really on a high level in terms of how the British War National Museum places it as the greatest battle the British Empire ever fought. But for a student of history in India, they would not really discuss that particular event as, or will not give it the pride of place in the history of India. But again, the other challenge I faced was, how do I present in a narrative which belongs to me as a person in that region, that particular history of the Second World War, which is quite significant if you look at the important it holds narrative. So one, I had to look at explaining the colonial interaction between the Naga Hills and, of course, the political agents of the British Empire, and looking at certain cultural aspects of the Naga people, which are oftentimes ignored by writers from the UK, when they write about the Battle of Kohima. For instance, I look into I trace the roots of naming places. For instance, everybody is familiar with Kohima. Kohima is a name that would sound normal to you. You would not really know the history of Kohima, but in the indigenous language, this Kohima was name given by the Britishers for their not pronounce the original word Kehuima. Yeah, Kehuima. Hello. And likewise, there are a lot of names, not just of places, but of identities, of the name of tribes which were mispronounced. So the entire, linguistic imperialism, as we call it, was prevalent. And in order to really bring about how that past impacts today, I had to really trace the entire discussion from when it first happened and how it is perceived today. Even in today's narrative, there are a lot of problems because there is this, many people will not be aware, but amongst the Nagas, there's so many tribes, so there is this, this debate and discussion over who is a Kacha Naga, who is a Paka Naga. I mean, it didn't just emerge as a discussion of modern day debate, but it emerged because the British actually named one particular group Kacha, and they were like, Naga Hills was under Assam those days. So that Kacha actually had many different, meanings. So therefore, today it's used pejoratively.
Your
but it
time
emerged
is up.
there. And my time is up.
I mistake of giving the mic to a politician for the second.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll come back to you with more questions. To my next panel, Dilip, and he's ready with his book. Dilip, if you could just show our audience your book. It's a very interesting book and an interesting subject. Ma'am Rita has also written on the Chinese Makum and the kind of atrocities they faced during the Indo-China War. It's an interesting book. I would like to lead with a question. You've written this book. What role does new media, journalists play?
मेरा चेन ऑफ थॉट खत्म कर दिया आपने थोड़ा सोचना पड़ेगा क्या पूछ रहा था ना so what role do we play in correcting or bringing out the local historical narratives to the mainstream, say to the mainland here?
Thank you, Karma. First of all, I want to confess that I'm not a politician like your first speaker. So you can call me a second time if you want. No, thank you for that question. Actually, my quick answer to that is that I really wish that more people would write, books like mine, but I don't mean to say that just by pointing to my book, but I think that there are so many stories and issues out of the Northeast and from all those states that people like me who live in so-called mainland India don't know much about. And in fact, this is a prime example of that. This is a subject that I had no idea about till I started writing about this subject about 10 or 12 years ago. So, and I think this can't be the only, I mean, this isn't the only story that people know nothing about. And I really wish that many more writers, many more journalists would go and look at all these stories. I mean, the war in Kohima is, the Battle of Kohima is one thing, but there are so many other issues in those areas that we should be all looking at. So I want to, though, expand on that a little bit with something that I've put together just to tell you about. And so bear with me. I want to actually start by reading out a few names to you. And these are those names: George Takai, Satsuki Ina, Daniel Inouye, Sony Fuji. They're all Japanese sounding names, perhaps you'll agree. And if you actually saw these people, you'd even say they're Japanese looking. But they're actually American. You know, Satsuki Ina is a psychotherapist. George Takai, you may have heard of. He starred in the Star Trek films. Daniel Inouye was a US senator. And for 2 years, in 2010 to 2012, he was actually third in line to the American presidency. But what forever makes these, marks them out, connects them, is that starting in 1942, the US incarcerated over 100,000 Japanese Americans like these people in prison camps because the US and Japan were at war. And with their Japanese looks, they were seen as potential traitors. But in fact, Ina was born in a camp. Satsuki Ina was born in a camp. George Takai spent a year and a half in another one of those camps. Inouye actually escaped because, ironically, he enlisted in the US Army. And he lost an arm to a grenade, and he was later awarded a Medal of Honor, the highest military honor that the US awards. And we know these names today, and we know this about his internment. There are memorials to this shameful blot in American history. I have visited one of those camps, Manzanar in California. And in 1988, under President Reagan, the US formally apologized to Japanese Americans and paid reparations. So this internment is now widely known across the USA. So that's my little prelude. Now let me read you a few other names, okay? William Ma, Yin Marsh, Ying Sheng Wong, Joy Ma, Ming Tung She. I know for a fact, I'm almost certain you've not heard of them. And I'm willing to bet that you've not heard of also what connects them. What does connect them is that these are Chinese Indians, and India incarcerated them and thousands like them in a prison camp in Deoli, Rajasthan, starting in 1962. Joy Ma, who was my co-author on this book, was born in the camp. That's her family on the cover, and spent her first 4 years there. And this happened to them because they were Chinese looking. And that's when the war started, India started rounding up Chinese looking Indians from across the Northeast, Makum, which Rita has written about, Tinsukia, Shillong, Darjeeling, Kalimpong, Calcutta, all of those cities. These people were rounded up and sent on a train to Deoli in Rajasthan, and that's where they spent the next several years. And over the years, actually, I should also say that they spent those several years there even though the war lasted only a month. Over the years, feeling betrayed by this country that they call their own, many of them found ways to emigrate abroad. And there's a big community in Toronto, and they eventually formed something called AIDCI, which stands for the Association of India Deoli Camp Internees. And every time tension builds on our border, or when there's a pandemic that people ascribe to China, these people in Toronto, but also the community here in India, feel the fear and the same hostility that they felt in 1962. So a couple things about this. In 2010, the AIDCI wrote to the Prime Minister of India, appealing for, and I'm quoting, the erection of a monument in Deoli to remind citizens of today of the value and meaning of human rights, civil liberties, and social justice. They got no response. In 2017, 50 AIDCI members went to the Indian High Commission in Ottawa carrying a letter addressed to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It appealed for, and I quote again, the Indian government to do the honorable thing and apologize to the Chinese Indian community. The Indian officials at the High Commission refused to accept the letter, so they taped it to the gate and left. They got no response to that letter either. And in 2021, the AIDCI wrote to Prime Minister Modi again, referring to, quote, the emotional and psychological wounds we have all suffered. And they said it's time to start the healing by acknowledging that innocent civilians and Indian citizens of Chinese descent were punished unjustly in 1962. And they asked again for an apology. There's still no response. So I want to ask you all to think of this. What will it do for this community if India acknowledges this injustice and apologizes? But I want to ask a larger question, actually. What will it do for India if we acknowledge and apologize for this injustice? And finally, I went actually to Ottawa with those 50 people in 2017. At one point, we were in a bus going from Toronto to Ottawa. At one point, one of the men on the bus, who was born in India, who went to the camp and had emigrated to Canada 45 years ago, a man I mentioned earlier, Ying Sheng Wong, but known as Bobby Wong. So this man began singing a song, okay? And I'm going to play for you just the first 2 lines of that song. I'm almost certain you all will know that song. And I want you to think of what the words mean in this context, okay? Can you all hear that? That's all. Thank you.
You should have done a few more lines. You know the song? Can you sing a few lines? 1, 2, 3.
कहाँ शुरू कहाँ खत्म ये मंजिलें हैं कौन सी कहाँ समझ सके ना
I think it's very powerful, to end such a historical, such a sad story on a musical note, Everybody should read his book, The Deoli Walas. I'm sure you'll love it. My next question is to Rita ma'am. Your book on the people of Makum is very, very similar. And again, you've written on the Bangladesh war. Now, these are historical displacements of people and migration. How has this shaped Northeast's cultural and our national identity thereof, according to you?
Thank you. Migration has 2 parts. One is, normal migration, people coming from different parts in search of better life, and some people are forced to leave their place, uproot their, from their own land and settle somewhere else. This change and forced migration, it is attached to so many things. Their identity, emotions, and so many issues are involved with this forced migration. So basically, my 2 novels, it has a very important aspect of this forced migration. So it is not only forced migration, but the India-China war. What has happened to those people during the 1962 war? The Assamese Chinese community living in Assam and different parts of India, and Darjeeling and this Siliguri area, tea garden areas. So the basic story is about those people who were arrested during the war, put in an internment camp, and they were deported back to China after almost 150 years. That land, China was it is not their motherland, because they have a history of assimilation in our country. They came as the laborer they were brought by British to grow tea industry in Assam, and they married local maidens, and that a new community was established just with their own dialect. That is, we call them Assamese Chinese. So in this process of arrest and deportations, the entire community was divided. Families were divided. It was a choice of the officers whom to arrest and whom to not, whom to deport, whom to leave behind. So in this process, families were divided. Some were sent back to China, some were living in the internment camp and different jails of Assam and some other jails also. And some were living in different parts of Assam. And their properties were seized as enemy property and were auctioned. So this pain of displacement, whom they call the Chinese people, I met them, I went to Hong Kong and China and some other places and met many people who were deported at that time. They call these places their Janam Jaga. And every Chinese has a tendency to always come back to their Janam Jaga before they die. But they could not. So it covers the war, the forced migration, the pain of separation, and so many identity crises. Some people living in India, some people living in China, some again migrated to Australia, Canada. That is the story. As we don't have much time, so I have to talk about the Bangladesh war. This is also, it is a shift of my work, because I have participated in Assam movement, and we were very much concerned about illegal migration from Bangladesh. So that we had a different perspective about the refugee coming from these places. This time, I wanted to see from the other bank, from the other side, from the refugee and victim perspective, because I saw, my father trained the Mukti Bahini people in Haflong Police Training Center, and I met those Mukti Bahini people. So I had a heart connection with the Mukti Bahini or that freedom movement of Bangladesh. So because of my personal experiences, just my personal, my connection, so I wanted to write and I wanted to use my personal, my childhood experience to cover a bigger picture, because Bangladesh Liberation War was not only a liberation war of a language community, Bengali nationalism, language nationalism. Not only this, it is connected with the Cold War politics. It involves China, Russia, US, Pakistan, and India. So many. It was a global issue. So everyone know that almost 1 crore people came to India for shelter during that time. So what was their position? What was their life after coming to India? This is almost, it is, in Assam, we don't have any actually that clear understanding about the refugee issue. We always look at them from our perspective. So as a writer, I felt that it was my duty to look from the other bank, to have a neutral picture of the entire history of this that India-Pakistan War of 1971. That is the theme. It is a trilogy, and it covers the pre-war and the during war and after-war politics of Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's beautifully put. As they say, there are Gorkhali Assamese, and then there is Assamese Chinese. And it's a state which has been fighting for, its identity for such a long time, but still they've accepted the Chinese as their own, which is something which is very beautiful. Finally, I come to you, Professor Sumantra Bose. Since you are a political scientist of sorts, what do you think are the historical or the political factors that have shaped Northeast integration into India? Or do you think that there have been certain issues which have been left out completely?
Great question. Good afternoon. Very happy to be here. Thank you to the organizers for having me. I should start out with a caveat. I'm not a scholar of the Northeast. However, as a comparative political scientist, I have worked a great deal on restive regions with chronic conflicts, and especially conflicts involving those in power at a political center and those relegated to or regarded as being part of some sort of periphery. So I do have some basic, elementary understanding, I think, of the Northeast through that comparative lens, having worked on many cases, including Kashmir and Palestine. I've only been to the Northeast a handful of times, and it's entirely my fault, especially because I was born and grew up practically on the doorstep of the region in Calcutta, and that is where I'm based now in my middle age. However, on the occasions I've been to the Northeast, I found it absolutely stunning and captivating in multiple ways. To get to your question, Karma, I want to problematize two terms. The first is national integration. Let me throw this out. This is a forum for debate. It could be that this slogan and formula of national integration represents something, an approach that is condescending, especially towards, quote-unquote peripheries, has a top-down bias, and may even be inherently coercive or lend itself to coercion. That, I think, has been largely the experience of the Northeast in our republic over the past 75 plus years. I would propose that better late than never, we ditch this misconceived approach represented by this term national integration and replace it with something else. It might be better to talk in terms of a unity based on recognition, equality, and amity. Unity based on recognition, equality, and amity, rather than top-down national integration. In my friend Shamrat Chowdhury's book, The Northeastern Political History, published 2 years ago, there's a wonderful anecdote about Nehru's visit to Kohima in 1953. The visit did not go well. It was more than a communication gap. It seemed like a dialogue of the deaf. And the eminent visitor seemed to be tone deaf to the Naga sentiments and concern. So it ended in a fiasco where a few hundred Naga chiefs dressed in their traditional garb, feather hats and loincloths, in unison, they turned their backs to Nehru, they thumped their buttocks, and then walked out in protest. I think that says a lot. The second term I want to problematize is center-periphery. This discourse of the center and the periphery. This must go. Telling someone, anyone, whoever that may be, or whichever region it may be, that you are the periphery of a nation state is so intrinsically and fundamentally demeaning, and is, to say the very least, not the best way to go about fostering national integration. And I think that too has been the bane of the Northeast's experience in India over the past 75 plus years. One final point, and then I'll wrap up. I have more to say in response to your next question, which I know you have. My final point is that, part of the beauty of the Northeast lies in its amazing, immense diversity. It is such a tapestry of cultures, communities, faiths, ethnicities. It's at the confluence of the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia, so has historical influences from both. As a result, it has been very easy for those who want from outside to manipulate the region and its politics, to play with this diversity in a destructive way. Because of this amazing tapestry, there's a ready-made situation there for someone who wants to control and govern through manipulation from outside, from the center, to set various groups and communities against each other. And that is what has happened also in the last 75 years, repeatedly so. The examples are so many. And let me just end by reminding all of us that this is simply a replay. We have seen this playbook before 1947, before 1950. This is simply a replay of the old colonial playbook and strategy of divide and rule.
Excellent points, Professor. And we are seeing this play out in Manipur. Today, this month, just now, a few seconds ago, it's being played out in Manipur. Over 200 lives lost, thousands displaced, and nobody's batting an eyelid. So that's exactly what is happening. I'm told that I just have about, it's time up? Okay, there's time up. But I'll just, if you guys want to ask, maybe one or two questions, there is a mic up front, and, if you want to. Otherwise, I will thank my panelists and close the session. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And this is not just a single question, just out of curiosity for Rita Baido and Mr. Dilip. What inspired you both to write on this topic, Assamese Chinese?
This is a human connection. It comes from heart. The issue touched me. I was moved by the pain, and my mission as a writer is to become a voice of the voiceless, who cannot speak. It can be a community, an individual, can be the hill or a tree, whatever. I want to speak for them who don't have a voice. Thank you.
What she said. But I will also say that as a journalist, you, especially in this country, you travel around this country and you pick up a stone and there's a story there that you've never heard and never heard of. And my journalist antenna are always going off like that. So that's why when I heard about this story, I said, I mean, apart from the human connection, as a journalist, I wanted to find out. And that's why I wrote what I did.
Because your book, Devliwalas, took me 1 month to go through the book. Because the thing
is that a compliment or is that a...
That's a sentiment. Because it is very close to this topic is very close to my heart, because I'm popularly known in between my friends as a quarter Chinese, because my maternal grandfather is a Devli internment.
I see. Okay. Let's talk when we...
Yeah, I'm here just to meet you both here.
Okay.
Yes, so you want to say?
I just want to jump in very quickly. I know we are out of time, but since Karma mentioned Manipur and the ongoing tragedy there, I should point out that far from being part of a so-called periphery, the present-day state of Manipur and also parts of the present-day state of Nagaland were the epicenter of what might be called the final war of Indian independence, waged by the Indian National Army, the Azad Hind Fauj, under the leadership of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And that story, among many others, is told in this book, which was up on the screen just a minute or two ago, and which you can pick up in the Pan Macmillan stall, which is very close by, I think, published in 2022 and 2023. I just want to say that all the communities, the Meiteis, the Pangals, that is the Manipuri Muslims, the Kuki-Zo communities, and the Nagas supported the Indian National Army's valiant struggle. It's truly inspiring. The Nikhil Manipuri Sabha, the Meitei organization, the Kuki-Zo communities in the south of Manipur, in the Churachandpur area. There's another name for Churachandpur also, of course, who helped. They all helped. It was in Moirang, 40 kilometers south of Imphal, that Colonel Shaukat Malik of the Indian National Army raised the national tricolour with the charkha in the middle on April 14th, 1944. Thus, the advance team into Moirang was led by one Naki Muhammad, who was a sepoy in the British Indian Army, captured in the fall of Singapore, and he was a Manipuri Pangal. So he spoke the local language, and he led the advance team into Moirang. And finally, what about the Nagas? The pioneer of Naga nationalism, Angami Zapu Fizo, joined the Indian National Army. He retreated to Rangoon after the military thrust failed. And like the Manipuri Meitei patriots, who also joined and helped the INA in various ways, Mr. Fizo was incarcerated once the British reoccupied the Northeast and Burma as well. He was incarcerated and tortured in the Insin prison, a very notorious prison in Rangoon. And both the Meitei patriots and Naga patriots like Mr. Fizo were released only in 1946. So it is a different history which shows us what may have been possible. And unfortunately, this legacy of unity and amity was sadly lost in independent India. And perhaps it's still not too late to correct, some of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And yet, these stories of sacrifice, we do not hear often. And that's why many of us are fighting to get the history of Northeast, in our school curriculum. Let's see how far we can go with that. I'd like to thank my distinguished panel. Thank you so much. I know you didn't get too much time, but we are running out of time all the time. And thank you, the audience, for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Karma. Thank you to the speakers. May I request you to just gather for a quick photograph that the festival has requested. I'd like to invite Raman Shrestha, our festival co-curator, to present a keepsake to all our speakers. Thank you once again. For anyone who is going to purchase books by our speakers, please, you're welcome to come and get them signed.
Everyone.